meet someone. The chemistry is immediate. They're charming, attentive, saying exactly what you want to hear. Your friends say, "This one's different." Your gut whispers something else. You ignore it. 6 months later, you're sitting alone, replaying every moment, asking yourself, how did I miss all the signs? You didn't miss them. You saw them. You just didn't know what you were looking at. This is about the red flags that psychology has spent decades documenting. The behavioral patterns that predict relationship failure, emotional manipulation, and psychological harm. Not subjective opinions, not anecdotal warnings from bitter people, evidence-based markers that research has proven predict toxic outcomes with statistical significance. What follows isn't about judgment. It's about pattern recognition. Because the most dangerous red flags aren't the obvious ones. They're the socially acceptable behaviors that everyone overlooks until the damage is done. Before we decode these patterns, understand this. Every red flag we're covering today has research backing it. Drop "pattern recognized" in the comments when you see one you've experienced. Let's see how universal these really are. Red flag 1. Love bombing, the neuroscience of manufactured intimacy. The first evidence-based red flag is love bombing, and it's not what most people think. It's not just excessive affection, it's the strategic deployment of dopamine manipulation to create addiction before establishing genuine connection. Dr. Perpetua Neo, psychologist specializing in narcissistic abuse, defines love bombing as accelerated intimacy that bypasses normal relationship development stages. The research is clear. Relationships that progress from meeting to "I love you" in under 3 months have a 73% higher failure rate than those that develop over 6 to 12 months. Here's what it looks like. Within days or weeks, they're talking about the future. They're using "we" language before you've had time to establish "I" in the relationship. They're making grand declarations, expensive gestures, constant contact. They're mirroring your values, your interests, your worldview with uncanny accuracy. You think, "We're so compatible." Actually, you're being shown a manufactured version of compatibility. The neuroscience explains why this works. When someone love bombs you, they're triggering massive dopamine releases in your brain's reward system. Dopamine isn't the pleasure chemical. It's the anticipation chemical. It creates craving. They're not making you feel loved. They're making you addicted to the feeling they provide. A 2019 study from the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships found that love bombing correlates strongly with later emotional abuse. Researchers tracked 800 relationships over 5 years. Those that began with love bombing showed an 89% correlation with subsequent controlling behavior, emotional manipulation, or abusive dynamics. Why? Because love bombing serves a specific purpose. It bypasses your discernment. When you're flooded with attention, affection, and validation, your critical thinking shuts down. You bond before you've actually assessed compatibility. You're emotionally invested before you know who they actually are. The antidote to love bombing is simple but uncomfortable. Slow down. If someone is rushing intimacy, creating urgency, pushing for commitment, that's not passion, that's strategy. Real love doesn't rush. Real compatibility doesn't require acceleration. Healthy attachment develops over time through consistent, demonstrated behavior. If they can't respect your pace, that's not someone who loves you. That's someone who needs to secure you before you see clearly. Red flag 2. Violation of minor boundaries. The erosion test. The second evidence-based red flag is the systematic violation of small boundaries, not dramatic violations, not violence or aggression. Tiny boundary crosses that seem insignificant in isolation but reveal everything about future behavior. Dr. John Gottman's research at the Love Lab at University of Washington tracked thousands of couples over 4 decades. His team identified boundary respect in minor interactions as one of the strongest predictors of relationship longevity. Couples where one partner consistently violated minor boundaries had an 81% divorce rate over 10 years. Couples with mutual boundary respect had a 12% divorce rate. Here's what this looks like. You say you don't want to discuss something. They bring it up again, just to understand. You say you need alone time. They show up anyway because they missed you. You set a small limit. They test it playfully. Each violation is wrapped in good intentions, humor, or affection. Each violation is small enough that objecting seems petty. This is the erosion test. They're testing whether you'll enforce your boundaries. They're discovering whether no is negotiable. They're learning if they can wear you down. Every time you let a small violation slide, you're teaching them that your boundaries are suggestions, not requirements. A 2021 meta-analysis published in Personality and Social Psychology Review examined 157 studies on boundary violations in relationships. The conclusion was unambiguous. Partners who violate minor boundaries early in relationships escalate to major boundary violations over time. The pattern is predictable. The small violations aren't accidents, they're reconnaissance. What makes this red flag particularly insidious is that objecting to minor violations makes you seem controlling or uptight. It's just a joke. You're being too sensitive. I was just trying to be close to you. The violation comes with built-in gaslighting that makes you doubt your own discomfort. The healthy response: state the boundary once clearly. If it's violated, there's a consequence: distance, reduced access, or ended interaction. If they can't respect small boundaries when it costs them nothing, they won't respect major boundaries when it costs them something. Your boundaries don't need to be reasonable to someone else. They need to be respected. Anyone who argues with your boundaries is showing you they value their preferences over your autonomy. Believe them. Drop a comment. Erosion test. Have you experienced someone systematically testing your small boundaries? Let's normalize talking about this pattern. Red flag 3. Triangulation, the strategic use of third parties. The third evidence-based red flag is triangulation, using third parties to create insecurity, competition, or validation rather than addressing relationship dynamics directly. This isn't about normal jealousy. This is strategic manipulation with clear psychological purposes. Dr. Ramani Durvasula, clinical psychologist specializing in narcissistic relationships, describes triangulation as the introduction of a third person to destabilize the dyad. Research from the Journal of Personality Disorders shows that individuals with cluster B personality traits use triangulation as a primary control mechanism in 94% of their relationships. Here's how it manifests. They frequently mention an ex with lingering ambiguity, just enough detail to create insecurity. They compare you to other people, just as an observation. They tell you what others think about you or your relationship. They create competitive dynamics by praising others for traits you lack. They use other people's opinions to validate their criticisms of you. The psychological mechanism is sophisticated. Triangulation serves multiple purposes simultaneously. It keeps you insecure and therefore more compliant. It positions them as the prize you're competing for. It creates external validation for their perspective, and it prevents direct accountability because they're just telling you what others said. A 2020 study in the Journal of Family Psychology tracked 600 relationships where triangulation was present. The findings: 87% of relationships with sustained triangulation ended within 3 years. 73% of people subjected to triangulation developed anxiety symptoms, and 62% experienced depression. The psychological damage isn't collateral, it's the point. What makes triangulation particularly damaging is that it externalizes relationship issues. Instead of, "I feel neglected," they say, "Everyone thinks you don't prioritize me." You're not responding to their feelings. You're responding to an imagined jury. You can't address or resolve the actual issue because it's been diffused through third parties. The healthy alternative is direct communication between two people. If they can't tell you how they feel without invoking what others think, say, or do, they're manipulating, not communicating. If they're constantly positioning you in competition with others, they're not choosing you. They're keeping you insecure. Anyone who uses other people to make you feel inadequate isn't trying to improve the relationship. They're trying to control you through manufactured insecurity. The solution is simple. Refuse to engage with triangulation. What does this other person think is irrelevant. What do you think is the only question that matters in a relationship between two people. Red flag 4. Lack of accountability, the psychological signature of abusers. The fourth evidence-based red flag is the consistent inability to take accountability without deflection, justification, or counter-accusation. This isn't about making mistakes. Everyone does. This is about what happens after the mistake. Dr. Lundy Bancroft, who spent decades studying abusive men for his work with intervention programs, identifies lack of accountability as the single strongest predictor of future abuse. In his research with over 2,000 abusive partners, 98% showed consistent patterns of deflection when confronted with harmful behavior. Here's what lack of accountability looks like. You express hurt about something they did, they immediately redirect to something you did. They explain why their behavior was actually justified given the circumstances. They focus on their intentions rather than your impact. They apologize but immediately add, "but you," which negates the apology. They become the victim of your reaction to their behavior. A 2018 study published in Violence and Victims examined 1 in 200 relationships across a 10-year span. The finding: inability to take accountability for causing harm predicted escalating psychological abuse in 91% of cases and physical abuse in 67% of cases. The pattern is so predictive that many domestic violence risk assessment tools now include deflects blame as a primary screening question. The psychology behind this is crucial to understand. Accountability requires several cognitive and emotional capabilities: the ability to tolerate feeling like the bad guy temporarily, the capacity to prioritize someone else's experience over self-image, the emotional regulation to hear criticism without becoming defensive, and the humility to admit imperfection. People who can't be accountable lack one or more of these capabilities. They can't tolerate the discomfort of being wrong, so they create narratives where they're not. They can't prioritize your pain over their ego, so they minimize your pain. They can't regulate defensiveness, so they attack instead. They can't admit imperfection, so they rewrite reality. What makes this particularly dangerous is that lack of accountability doesn't improve over time. It calcifies. Each time they successfully deflect, justify, or reverse victim and offender, they strengthen that neural pathway. The pattern becomes automatic. Years into a relationship, you'll find yourself apologizing for their behavior because their deflection has become so sophisticated. The test is simple. Bring up something that hurt you. Watch what happens. Do they listen, acknowledge impact regardless of intent, and commit to different behavior? Or do they explain, justify, deflect, or counterattack? Their response tells you everything about whether this relationship can be healthy. Healthy people can say, "I hurt you, I'm sorry, I'll work on that," without adding justifications. Anyone who can't do that is telling you they value being right over your well-being. Believe them. Comment deflection. If you've experienced this pattern, how many times did you end up apologizing for bringing up your own hurt? And red flag 5, isolation tactics, the systematic dismantling of support networks. The fifth evidence-based red flag is the gradual strategic isolation from your support network. This doesn't look like dramatic demands. It looks like reasonable preferences that accumulate into complete isolation. Dr. Lisa Aronson-Fontes, senior lecturer at the University of Massachusetts and researcher on abusive relationships, documents isolation as a universal tactic across all forms of abuse. Her research shows that in 94% of abusive relationships, isolation tactics began within the first 6 months, often before any other obvious red flags. Here's how isolation manifests. They don't explicitly forbid you from seeing friends or family. They just create friction around it. They're upset when you return from seeing others. They sulk when you make plans without them. They criticize your friends or family subtly. Do you notice how she always makes everything about herself? They create drama or emergencies that coincide with your social plans. They make you choose repeatedly until choosing others becomes too costly. A landmark 2017 study from the Journal of Interpersonal Violence tracked 1,500 relationships over 8 years. The findings were stark. Relationships where one partner systematically isolated the other showed 96% correlation with later emotional abuse, 84% correlation with financial abuse, and 71% correlation with physical abuse. Isolation isn't just a red flag, it's the foundation that makes all other abuse possible. The mechanism is psychological warfare. Your friends and family are your reality check. They notice when you've changed. They point out red flags. They provide alternative perspectives. An abuser knows they can't control you while you have outside input. Isolation removes your ability to verify reality independently. Once isolated, their version of events becomes your only reference point. What makes isolation particularly insidious is that it's incremental. You don't notice you've stopped seeing friends until you realize you can't remember the last time you saw them without conflict. You don't notice you've stopped calling family until you realize they've stopped calling you. You don't notice you've become completely dependent on one person until that person is your only source of validation, reality, and social connection. The research on isolation's impact is disturbing. Isolated abuse victims take an average of 7 years longer to leave compared to those who maintain support networks. Isolated victims experience PTSD at rates 3.5 times higher. Isolation doesn't just enable abuse, it amplifies every form of psychological harm. The counter move: maintain your relationships fiercely. If someone creates consistent friction around your other connections, that's not love, that's control. Healthy partners encourage your friendships, respect your family connections, and understand that your other relationships make you a fuller person. They don't feel threatened by your support network. They appreciate it. Anyone who needs you isolated to keep you is someone you need to escape. Your support network isn't optional. It's survival infrastructure. Red flag 6. Rapid emotional cycling, the psychological whiplash effect. The sixth evidence-based red flag is rapid emotional cycling, extreme mood shifts from intense affection to cold withdrawal without clear cause. This creates a psychological dependency that research shows is as addictive as substance abuse. Dr. Joe Carver, psychologist specializing in trauma bonding, documents this pattern as intermittent reinforcement, the most powerful behavioral conditioning mechanism known to psychology. His research shows that relationships with unpredictable emotional availability create stronger bonding than consistently positive or consistently negative relationships. Here's what this looks like. One day they're intensely affectionate, future-focused, all in. The next day they're cold, distant, questioning the relationship. There's no clear trigger, no event that explains the shift. When you ask what changed, they say nothing's wrong or they blame you for being too needy. When they return to warmth, they act like the coldness never happened. A 2019 study from Psychological Science examined the neurological impact of unpredictable emotional availability. Brain scans showed that people in relationships with intermittent reinforcement patterns showed identical neural activation patterns to gambling addicts, the same dopamine pathways, the same compulsive seeking behavior, the same inability to walk away despite consistent net negative outcomes. Why is unpredictability so addictive? Because your brain is constantly trying to solve the puzzle. What makes them warm versus cold? You analyze every interaction, trying to identify the pattern. You modify your behavior, trying to maintain the warmth. You become hypervigilant to their emotional state. Your entire emotional regulation becomes dependent on managing their mood. The cruelty is that there is no pattern. The cycling isn't responsive to your behavior. It's their internal state or their strategic manipulation. You can't solve a puzzle that has no solution, but your brain keeps trying, which keeps you trapped. Research from the Journal of Experimental Social Psychology shows that intermittent reinforcement creates trauma bonding, psychological attachment that survives and even strengthens through harm. Victims of intermittent reinforcement report feeling more in love during abuse than people in consistently healthy relationships. That's not love, that's addiction masquerading as love. The healthy alternative is emotional consistency. Healthy people have moods, but their fundamental affection and commitment remain stable. They might be stressed or tired, but they don't cycle from "I love you" to "I'm not sure about us" without explanation. They communicate when they're struggling instead of withdrawing and letting you guess. If you're constantly confused about where you stand, that's not complexity. That's manipulation. If you feel like you're always one misstep from losing them, that's not love. That's control. Emotional consistency isn't boring. It's the foundation of actual security. Drop intermittent if you've experienced this cycling. How long did it take you to realize the pattern wasn't solvable? Red flag 7. Contempt, the research-backed predictor of relationship death. The seventh and most predictive evidence-based red flag is contempt, expressions of disgust, superiority, or moral judgment towards you as a person. Dr. John Gottman calls contempt the sulfuric acid of love. His 4-decade research shows it's the single strongest predictor of relationship dissolution. Gottman's research tracked thousands of couples, measuring physiological responses, communication patterns, and outcomes over years. The findings: couples who displayed contempt toward each other had a 93% divorce rate within 10 years. No other variable, not frequency of conflict, not financial stress, not sexual satisfaction, predicted relationship failure with comparable accuracy. Here's what contempt looks like: eye-rolling when you speak, mocking tone when repeating your words, sarcasm disguised as humor, disgust at your emotions. Are you seriously crying about this? Name-calling during conflict. You're such a child. Moral superiority. I would never do something like that. Treating your perspective as beneath consideration. What makes contempt particularly toxic is that it communicates fundamental disrespect. Disagreement says, I think you're wrong. Contempt says, I think you're less than. Anger says, I'm upset about your behavior. Contempt says, I'm disgusted by who you are. A 2016 meta-analysis in personal relationships examined 242 studies on contempt across 67 countries. The conclusion: contempt is universally corrosive across all cultures, genders, and relationship types. It predicts not just relationship failure, but psychological harm to the target. People subjected to sustained contempt show elevated rates of depression, 68%, anxiety, 71%, and complex PTSD, 34%. Why is contempt so damaging? Because it attacks your fundamental worth. You can change behavior that someone criticizes. You can't change being inherently contemptible in someone's eyes. Contempt communicates that the problem isn't what you do, it's that you exist as you are. The research on contempt's trajectory is particularly disturbing. Once contempt enters a relationship, it rarely leaves. Gutman's team found that couples who displayed contempt didn't typically resolve it. They either divorced or descended into negative sentiment override, a state where even neutral or positive partner behavior is interpreted negatively. The only anti-keratin for contempt is zero tolerance. One instance of contempt deserves serious conversation. A pattern of contempt deserves exit. There's no healthy relationship where one person views the other with disgust. None. If someone treats you with contempt, they don't love you. They might want you, need you, or be attached to you, but they don't respect you. And without respect, love isn't possible. It's just addiction, convenience, or control wearing love's mask. Final question. Drop zero tolerance. If you're committing to treating these red flags as deal breakers, not problems to fix, here's what ties all 7 evidence-based red flags together. Each one serves to erode your autonomy, reality testing, and self-trust. Love bombing creates dependency before discernment. Minor boundary violations test your enforcement capacity. Triangulation externalizes your reality. Lack of accountability rewrites cause and effect. Isolation removes external reality checks. Emotional cycling creates addictive uncertainty. Contempt destroys your sense of worth. These aren't random dysfunctions. They're a system. Whether conscious or not, these patterns work together to create a relationship where your needs, perceptions, and boundaries become increasingly irrelevant while their control becomes increasingly total. The research across all these areas points to one conclusion. Red flags don't improve with time, communication, or love. They're not problems to solve. They're information about who someone is and what a future with them holds. Your job isn't to fix people who show these patterns. Your job is to believe what they're showing you and respond accordingly. That response is simple. Protect yourself. Create distance. End access. Walk away. The most dangerous belief in modern relationships is that love conquers all. It doesn't. Love without respect is abuse. Love without reciprocity is exploitation. Love without safety is trauma. These 7 red flags aren't isolated mistakes. They're evidence-based predictors of psychological harm. Psychology wants you to know them not to make you cynical, but to make you safe. Recognize the patterns, respect the research, protect yourself accordingly. That's not pessimism, that's wisdom. This is Primal Mind. Until next time, trust the evidence.